Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Schmoozin with Forouzan podcast. I am very excited about today's guest. We have Mr. Brian Nomi from the law offices of Brian Nomi. This is a gentleman who does civil law and does a lot of work in the world of landlord-tenant and even bankruptcy. And I just got the feeling during Corona, with everything I'm seeing people saying online and how difficult it's been, it's probably a good time to have a landlord-tenant attorney on the podcast. So, Mr. Nomi, happy to have you, sir.
Thank you for hosting me here.
My absolute pleasure. So let's just start with the big picture. We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are having difficulty finding jobs, making money, whatever it might be. Big picture. What do you see going on right now in the world, and has it ties into your practice?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the whole world. I'm only going to talk about California landlord-tenant law. So that's all that I know about. I can't tell you anything about Nevada or any place else, but I will tell you about California. The big picture in California is that there is a eviction moratorium that's in place. It was put in place back in March. Starting September 1st, there's been a new law that I'll just call it 3088. It's Assembly Bill 3088. That's the shorthand that we use. So September 1st, we dealt with the world of 3088, which just got extended to June 30th. So that's the universe that we're in, is that we're dealing with 3088 until June 30th of this year. What's going to happen on June 30th? I don't know. Coronavirus is going to get better, or it's going to get worse. Who knows? But I'll give you just a brief overview of 3088. It basically prohibits a landlord from evicting a tenant because of non-payment of rent. That's what you need to know about 3088. If the tenant just fills out a declaration saying, I'm experiencing financial hardship because of COVID-19, doesn't have to be true, doesn't have to be supported by anything. All the tenant has to do is sign the declaration, then that tenant cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent. Now, there are ways that a tenant can be evicted. A tenant can be evicted if the tenant is doing criminal activity, for example, selling drugs at your apartment. If the tenant is running a prostitution ring or using a gun to shoot at other tenants in the same building, that's criminal activity for which the tenant can be evicted. So there's all sorts of other reasons that you can evict someone. And those are some extreme examples. Let me give you the real life examples that are being used by landlords right now. Unlawful sublease. You have someone else living in the property with you without the landlord's permission. That's a ground for eviction right now. Refusing to give the landlord access to the property. That's something that a few cases have been going on. Those are the fault causes: criminal activity, subleasing, refusal to grant access to the property, destroying the property, like tearing down the walls and causing waste and nuisance at the property. Those are the at-fault reasons that the landlord can terminate you with a 3-day notice to cure or quit. No more 3-day pay or quits. Like I say, it's basically impossible to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent. So those are the fault reasons that a tenant can be terminated for fairly quickly. The no fault reasons that exist are fairly limited right now. There's only like 4 or 5 of them, and I'll go through those really quickly. The landlord can terminate you if the landlord, him or herself, or their family intends to move into the property, 60-day notice. If the landlord intends to withdraw the property from the real estate market, such as wanting to sell or just not wanting to be a landlord anymore. The law does not require the landlord to be a landlord for the rest of his life. If he just wants to not be a landlord anymore and withdraw the property from the rental market, then the landlord can terminate the tenancy with a 60-day notice for that reason. Substantial remodeling that would require a building permit needed to maintain the habitability, like the place is completely falling apart and we need to get people out just to make it basically habitable. That's another reason. One other reason that surprises some people is that if the landlord wants to sell the property and is in escrow to sell it to someone who is going to buy it and live in the house for at least 1 year, that only requires a 30-day notice. So those are some of the reasons that people can be terminated for right now. One other thing that you may want to know is that under the 60-day notices that I just described, the tenant's entitled to 1 month of free rent. In other words, the last month of rent is waived. So that sort of softens the blow. The tenant has 60 days to find another place and gets the last 30 days of rent for free. So that's kind of a short and dirty summary of where the law is in California right now under AB 3088. That's applying to most tenancies that exist. I'll open it up for any questions or other discussion from there, but I'd be happy to delve deeper into any of those things that I just talked about.
That's a A fantastic just explanation of the law real quick. I think we did that in 5 minutes. We did
Yeah.
not bury the lead here. And I think the majority of the people who are going to be watching this video are very much so interested in literally everything you just said. I got most of it. I'm going to try to do some big picture sort of grand gestures and explain what I heard, which is if you submit a declaration that indicates hardship with no evidence, you can avoid the eviction. However, there's other commonsensical and frankly extreme reasons that you can nonetheless be evicted other than failure to pay. Is that fair to
That's
say?
right. That's
Okay.
exactly right. That's
And
exactly right.
so, what I always wondered about this, how does this work? So if a tenant submits one of these declarations and now this tenant is not paying rent, when the law that you just mentioned, it stops, I think you said in June 30th, was it?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
so the day after June 30th, does the landlord then come back and say, hey, you owe me 6 months back rent? Or how does that work?
No one knows. That's the real answer right there. I expect that there's going to be some sort of new law that gets put into place between now and June 30th. Let me tell you something else that you may have heard in the news. For people who are not paying rent, the law 3088 law says you're supposed to pay 25% of the rent. But that 25% does not, let's say hypothetically a tenant was renting a place for $1,000 a month. The tenant only has to pay $250 a month. But the $250 a month does not have to be paid until June 30th. So what happens on June 30th is your question. My big answer is I don't know what's going to happen on June 30th. There may be some like a 12-month time frame to pay back all the rent that you owe, or maybe longer, or who knows what the legislature is going to decide. It's hard to say what's going to happen. I will tell you one other thing that came up just recently in the last few weeks, which is when they extended the time frame from January 31st to June 30th, California put into place this new program of rental assistance. There's already rental assistance that exists out there, but there's supposedly some new thing that's going on. I don't know what the website is. I don't know what the phone number is to apply, but it's a rental assistance program where if the landlord agrees to accept 80% of the rent from the rental assistance program, the landlord must then waive the other 20%. So some landlords probably would say, hey, I'd rather get 80% of the rent and then not collect you will never collect the other 20%, but at least you're getting the 80% right now, which is a lot better than getting 0% until June 30th. So that's something that is being implemented. It's supposed to be going around statewide. It's primarily targeted towards lower income renters. They're probably not going to get to the people who are paying $10,000 a month. They might go to the people who are paying $1,500 or $2,500 a month rent before they start getting to the higher income people. So that's another interesting thing that just happened in the last few weeks. But for the tenant who's out there, like let's say that you're a tenant, you can't pay rent at all, and you've submitted the financial hardship declaration. What does the future hold? I don't know what the future holds, but I have a feeling that there's going to be some sort of compromise. My suggestion to tenants is if you can pay the 25%, I would pay the 25% just as a show of good faith. I would also apply for the rental assistance, because if the rental assistance pays the 80%, then you don't have to pay anything. And then the landlord is supposed to be satisfied with what the landlord gets. So those are some interesting ways that the tenant could use the system to try to help maybe stay beyond June 30th. I mean, let's say that the whole legal scheme is just done away with on June 30th and we're back to how it was pre-COVID. That's one possibility. You want to be on the landlord's good side, and the landlord would probably appreciate it if you could at least make a token payment of some rent. So, I mean, I think most landlords understand that there are people who have lost their jobs and cannot pay rent. I think that landlords would like to work this out. There are some tenants who are doing their best to pay whatever they can. There are some tenants that are just sitting there smoking weed all day and not doing a damn thing. And those are the tenants that I think will be the first to go. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but we just need to stay tuned to what the law becomes on June 30th with regard to non-payment of rent. The law is probably going to get a little more liberal on ways that you can kick people out after June 30th as well. Generally in California, a landlord does not have to have a reason to kick someone out of a premises. They could just say, I don't like you because I don't like you, and kick a tenant out. That's what the law was pre-COVID. Now, that there are exceptions to that. A landlord cannot evict somebody because of their race or their sex or their a protected reason. You can't kick someone out because they're gay. You can't kick someone out because they're Hispanic. You can kick them out because I don't like the way you park your car and you talk smack to me. That's a perfectly legal reason to kick a tenant out. as long as you're not being racially or discriminatory or anything like that. That is something that's going to be changing, I believe, in July of this year. I think that right now there's only 4 or 5 reasons to kick out a tenant, such as I'm selling the place, I'm having family move into the place, or I have to substantially demolish or remodel the place. Those are the only reasons that you can kick a tenant out right now. I think there's going to be more reasons, or more expanded reasons, for kicking a tenant out just because you don't like the tenant. And I'll share a little secret with you, which is a lot of landlords are kicking tenants out because they want to move a family member in, when the true reason is because the tenant's not paying rent. That's happening right now. There's no doubt that landlords are making that choice. Or I mean, the landlord might look at the situation and say, hey, I've got this house, I got a tenant in it who's paying me 0 rent. Why don't I sell the house? I can sell the house and get my money back, or I can keep the house forever, or until the legislature changes the law with a tenant who's paying me 0 rent. I can understand why a landlord would make that decision and just sell the place. So those are some interesting considerations from both the landlord and the tenant's perspective.
Okay, so it sounds like at the very least, come the end of June, at least the 25% is owed at that point. And
That's
yeah, and what may come after that. Let me ask you a question here. Look, I don't do landlord tenant, and I'm seeing everything from afar. And what's going through my head is, isn't this all really messy?
It is messy. It's messy and complicated. It's like nothing I've ever seen. No doubt about it. The cases are taking much longer. They're being harder fought. Yeah, it's a big, and no one really understands. Very few people understand the law very well, and no one knows what the law is going to become in a few months. So yeah, to me, that's a big mess. And by the way, I know that you're somewhere in the LA area. There are certain parts of LA that have, I mean, the city of LA has rent control. So that's another layer of complexity, which I have no information about LA rent control. I have no information about city of Santa Monica rent control. That's a whole other thing that has other protections for tenants that make things a lot harder for landlords, and give a lot more protections to tenants. So that's another thing that I'm not even going to touch, but it exists for some of your, I imagine some of your listeners are in the city of LA or city of Santa Monica, or other places that have rent control. So that's something that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is, on top of everything you just said, there's also rent control laws that are going to get involved, and you might not be able to advise on those. But whoever's listening, if you're listening and you're taking all this down, guess what? Now you have even more homework. In addition to everything Mr. Nomi just pointed out, you also got to take a look at rent control and what's going on. Now, let's say you have a tenant and they want to know more about this stuff. Is there a singular source that they can go to for information? I mean, obviously they can call you, they can call your office. And what's the difference between, at what point should people reach out to an attorney such as yourself? And at what point should they just be looking at self-help stuff on the internet?
That's an interesting question. I can tell you for sure that there's no singular source. I mean, the California legislature has, I think the California Department of Housing has, or something like that, has a website that gives some simple answers and simple questions. Two resources that I use a lot are the Department of Real Estate website and the California Apartment Association website, both of which have some really good information. I can also tell you, with regard to like some local things, there are specific departments in the cities of LA and other cities that are specifically geared towards informing tenants of what their rights are under specific LA city rent control ordinances. But I would say California Association of Realtors, the Department of Real Estate, and the Apartment Owners Association, all of them have websites that are very informative. That's actually where I go to get most of my information. And I find it very, very educational.
At what point should, and I would like to talk about landlords in a minute too, but let's continue with the tenants.
Yeah.
At what point should a tenant reach out to an attorney such as yourself?
I mean, I'm a really nice attorney. I take phone calls all day long, and I'll give tenants 5 minutes or 6 minutes for free all the time. I do that a lot. Maybe there's all sorts of legal aid organizations that give free advice all through the state of California. So, I mean, if a tenant does not understand what's happening, if the tenant's being asked to sign something that he doesn't understand, if the tenant has received legal papers, I certainly recommend that tenant get some help. you know, don't be afraid to reach out for help, because there is plenty of help out there, and most of the help is free. So tenants should not be afraid. They need to go out and get the help they need. They need to pick up the phone, go to Google, whatever it is, and try to get someone to help. You know, maybe some attorney might charge 25 or 50 bucks for a consult. If the attorney wants $1,000 to answer simple questions like that, that's crazy. But you know, get the advice. You know, look to Google, do your online research, or get some help from someone. The help is out there. You just have to find it.
Got it. Okay. So, on one hand, I'm thinking to myself, goodness, imagine being a tenant and let's say your job was taken away. It wasn't essential. Maybe you worked at some kind of a
Mhm.
spa or something. It's not exactly a great job market right now to go find work. And you have this pressure, which is I got to pay my bills. And I can appreciate there's tenants who are under tremendous stress, anxiety. And it's part of the reason I think it's good that we're doing this right now. We can get some information out there. On the other end of the spectrum, I can also imagine there's a landlord who's saying, hey, goodness, I got bills to pay too. I got a mortgage on this property, and you are not paying me any rent right now, and I don't think you ever will, or something of
Yeah.
that nature. How is it looking from the landlord's perspective, all this?
You know, I'll tell you, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but generally speaking, in California, about 96 to 97% of tenants are paying. And during COVID, it's gone down to like 94, 93%. So it's not a huge, gigantic change. I mean, there's always going to be some tenant somewhere that doesn't pay you. That's just a cost of doing business if you're a landlord. It's not that much worse now, honestly. The great majority of tenants, over 90% of tenants, are paying exactly as they should pay. From a landlord's perspective, I don't think it hurts that much. I mean, it would hurt if and I'm finding that to be true. I have many landlords that own many units of housing, and they're telling me maybe 5% of the units are not paying. So, it's a small decrease. I don't think the landlords are that bad off. I don't know. I deal with a lot of landlords. I don't know any of them that are applying for mortgage forbearance. Most of my landlords are getting by just fine, honestly. But I mean, for a landlord to lose, there are some landlords that I have that only have one rental property, and that one rental property is not paying. That's a huge problem for those. So there are certainly some landlords that are being hurt by this, and those are the landlords who are saying, just get me out of this so I can sell the place. That's what those landlords are saying. I haven't seen any landlord be a victim of foreclosure or anything so drastic. So I mean, I'm a landlord myself, and I tend to side with the landlords most of the time. I'm a very pro landlord guy, but I think landlords are doing fine right now. I don't feel sorry for the landlords. I do feel sorry for most tenants who genuinely have lost their jobs. It is understandable. Um, I mean, there are some tenants that probably wouldn't have had a job whether there was COVID or no COVID. And so I don't know. There's my explanation for your question, and I don't know. That's just what I think about the situation. I don't feel sorry for the landlords by and large. There some tenants I do feel sorry for, some I don't.
I think that's actually very insightful. That and to be honest with you, I haven't heard this anywhere else. That the majority of the landlords that you're dealing with are still getting 90+% of their rent, and
For
it's
multi units, yeah. I mean,
from multi.
there are a few of my clients are single unit landlords, and so those are the ones who are hurting the most.
It's like someone purchased a condo and is leasing it out to someone or something of that
Yeah,
nature. Yeah,
yeah,
so it's the people who have single units or single homes that they
right.
are renting out. That's the other people, because the majority of their income all their rental income is based on that one unit, and therefore they're losing that income. And I
Yeah.
assume, and what? Let me ask you this question. It's like at the end of the day, someone's got to pay someone. What's going on with the banks? How are they treating landlords in terms of mortgages and things like that?
I don't have any information on that. I do know that the 3088 laws have mortgage forbearance, which the landlord could ask for. I just don't know anyone who's even asking for it from the landlord side. So I have very little information on that. Well, I don't know of any landlord who's making any sort of attempt to pay the mortgage that's being foreclosed on anywhere. I mean, that's my honest answer from what I actually see in the field. I mean, there are some foreclosures going on. I see that once in a while, but my feeling is that there's very little foreclosure activity happening.
Let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you the same question on the tenant side in just a minute, though I think we may have already
Sure.
answered it. But what can a landlord do right now? Looking at the landscape, generally speaking, what could a landlord do right now where, what can a landlord do right now where they're saying, hey, I'm seeing what's going to come up in June. I understand what's going on in the world with this Corona stuff. What can a landlord do to protect their interests starting today?
Hmm. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, the landlords already have tenants in their property. So what else can you do? I mean, my advice is I always try to be as nice to people as I can. Talk to your tenants who are having problems. Try to work something out with them. You know, for landlords that are getting new tenants, I'm telling them to get big security deposits to make sure they run a good background check on what these people are, verify that the tenant has their income from a stable job. Those are just basic things that a landlord should be doing anyway in any kind of environment. But anyway, that's those are some things that a landlord could do.
Okay, well, let me also ask you this. On the tenant side, is there anything that tenants starting today can do, considering the landscape, considering what's about to happen in June, for example?
Hmm. My best advice to tenants is to go do the research and find out where that rental assistance is. I mean, if you're not able to pay rent because you're genuinely suffering financial hardship, get into that program so that the landlord can get paid to 80%. And then that has two benefits, one of which is the landlord probably would be a lot nicer to you because the landlord is getting paid to 80%. The other one is the landlord would probably be more likely to keep you on as a tenant, assuming that in June the landscape has changed. You can go back to work. You can start having a regular income. And that makes things a lot more likely for you to be able to stay after June 30th. So get the rental assistance, work with the landlord. And if you pay the landlord $1 a month, that's so much better than paying $0 a month. Just to show good faith, show that you're willing to work and that you understand the landlord's situation.
Let's talk about that because that has been a thread in this conversation. You have brought up, I think a lot of times people are watching attorneys on TV and they think we're all like, and we're all trying to, get at each other's throats. And so many times experienced attorneys say, no, you get bees with honey. And it sounds over here like you're saying, hey, show your landlord good faith. You're also saying, hey, landlord, speak to your tenants and see what's going on. Tell
Yeah.
me about that. Does that really move things around in this world, the manner in which you approach people?
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Especially in the landlord tenant field. I mean, I have landlords there are some tenants who are paying just a percentage of the rent, and my landlords are actually pretty happy with those tenants. They're going to be willing to work something out with them when the landscape changes. But there are other tenants that are just, I can tell you some tenants that I see have a mindset of, I'm not going to pay you a thing, landlord, and you can just go suck it. That's the attitude that those tenants have, and that makes a huge difference in the relationship between the landlord and the tenants. Because I think when the time comes, those are going to be the tenants that get kicked out first. So, in life in general, my attitude is be nice to everyone, be kind to everyone, and try to be reasonable in your business dealings. So anyway, that's my overarching theme about that.
Is there earlier you said there was tenants who are trying to make something of it. There's tenants who are trying to work around the difficulties that this situation has raised for everyone. And of course, some people are hit harder by others, and some people are outright devastated by it.
Yeah.
And then you also said there's just some tenants that it almost sounded like they're just kind of riding the wave, so to speak. Is there a lot of that kind of stuff going on right now? Are landlords faced with a lot of that? I'm going to assume no, because you're saying 90+% are paying their rent, but I am still curious.
Well, I mean, like I say, 90+% of tenants are paying the rent in full right now. Of the 10, I don't know, it's less than 10% that are in default. I'd say maybe half are making some effort, and then the other half are just having a really bad attitude, saying, "Screw you, landlord! I'm not going to pay you a penny. You're never going to get anything out of me." So, I would say it's about a half and half mix. That's what I would say. My unscientific, non-statewide poll is that's where we're at. Which honestly, in California, there's probably 3% of leases that go into default every year anyway. So we're not that far above that. I mean, in this world, there are people who are deadbeats, and there are some tenants who are deadbeats, and there are some tenants who genuinely cannot pay the rent because it's a choice of either pay the rent or pay for food. So I understand that. To me, that's reasonable. So anyway, that's what I see of the world that we live in, and It's not 100% accurate, but that's just what I see. It's kind of a mix of half and half.
It's almost like a silver lining to this whole conversation. And I did not know, again, that the landlords are doing okay. And I'm listening to, you're saying, you're not all that. It's not that you're not concerned, but they're doing okay, like I said a moment ago. And that actually somewhat inspired me in the sense that, look, I'm glad to know that people are still able to pay their rents, and I'm glad to know that landlords are still getting their rents. Sometimes when you take a step back and you watch the news or whatever it might be, it sounds like the world is in apocalyptic conditions. And again, this is not to take away from any of the horrendous devastation that's occurred because of this pandemic, certainly. But it does sound like there is a push to get things moving a little bit. Maybe there's some hope at the end of the tunnel.
What sort of push are we talking about? I don't quite understand the question.
I would have never expected 90% of landlords are getting paid.
Oh, yeah.
I would have never expected. I would have expected that number to be much, much lower. This implies to me that people are in fact figuring out, something to do in this catastrophic time, in this extremely difficult and burdensome climate that we have under this pandemic. It gives me hope, actually. I'm not a landlord. I have no horse in the race of landlords getting paid. But the fact that landlords are getting paid implies people are paying them, which implies people are somehow figuring it out. And that's nice to hear amidst the doom and gloom. Is there anything that you can add to that in terms of, hey, look, we're hoping that maybe X, Y, and Z we can get done after? I know we already discussed this to an extent, but is there anything else that you could add to that, maybe coming up in June, things that maybe even you would like to see the government do or you think would be a good idea?
I think 90+% of tenants are really good people who want to provide for their family. And so they're probably stretching as hard as they can to pay the rent. What I would like to see happen in June is something where, the tenant is required to pay the regular rent in June and then maybe given a time frame in which to repay what they didn't pay. So, I mean, let me just give you a standard example. Let's say that there's a tenant who pays $2,500 a month rent. That's kind of low end rent throughout most of coastal Southern California. And that tenant's been unemployed for the last year, let's just say hypothetically. Well, 12 months times $2,500 a month comes out to $30,000. So if the tenant hasn't paid $30,000 and then all of a sudden on June 30th, it would be fair for assuming that the economy is somewhat back to normal, maybe have the tenant pay that full $2,500 of rent. And then how do we deal with the $30,000 or so that's owed? I would like to see some guidance from the legislature on that. Like maybe this rental assistance thing. I mean, there's money coming from the federal government in stimulus. Maybe the landlord agrees to take like half of that now in the form of some sort of like grant from the government's housing, the Department of Housing or California state, whatever. So the landlord gets paid $15,000 now, but must forgive the other $15,000. Or the tenant must pay, but has like a year or two to pay off. So in other words, if you think about it, if it's only 1 year, that tenant who's at $2,500 a month is going to have to be making $5,000 a month payments over 12 months, which I think is not feasible for almost every tenant. So, I mean, the landscape that we're looking for in the future might be something like a 5-year time frame to pay off the rent, which is why I think it would be so nice if there were some sort of government assistance to pay back that arrearage and keep people in their homes. I mean, I think landlords want to have good tenants who are paying rent on time, and I think the tenants want to be current without having a monkey on their back in terms of a large amount of money that they have to owe and keep on paying on over the next several months or over the next several years. It's just another debt. So to me, it would be great if we could have something worked out in California that would address those concerns between the landlords and the tenants. And what's going to happen in the end, I don't know. But I think there is talk that I've seen of solutions like that, where long time periods for the repayment of back rent that's owed.
Something that's been running through my head this whole time as we've been chatting, and this is a little outside. This is not a legal question. This is outside maybe even our careers, but I have a feeling you would be close enough to this that you can at least opine. There's got to be a mental health component to all of this, people who have the pressure of paying rent in a pandemic. And though I prior to this podcast, I would say landlords who aren't getting paid, but it sounds like that's not exactly happening. So focusing mostly on tenants, your tenants you've spoken to, when you do give people, consultations and this, that, and the other, how's everyone doing?
Most, I'm not just to say most, but every tenant that I work with feels really bad about this. They want to pay their rent, but they just can't. I mean, they can't pay with money that they don't have. And so that makes them feel like they're bad people. And one thing that I always tell the tenants is, you're not a bad person because you lost your job. There's millions of people who've lost their jobs thanks to COVID. I mean, so don't think of yourself as a bad person who's going to do bad things. Think of yourself as just someone who's like many other Americans. You lost your job through no fault of your own. Let's make some reasonable decisions to try to help you to the best of our ability. That's what I would like tenants to know. I mean, I'm no psychologist. I haven't seen. I mean, I'm sure that there are some tenants out there that are very depressed and who are, maybe in California, there's probably more than one person who's committed suicide just because of the stress of COVID. Not necessarily landlord tenant related, but just the whole COVID thing in general. I mean, that's just a terrible thing to think about, but I'm sure that exists. I mean, that's a whole debate and discussion that I don't think I'm qualified to talk about. But yes, there are a lot of people under stress, and there are a lot of people making difficult choices and having to come up with, I don't know, anything that they can to protect themselves and their families. And I think almost everyone that I've seen is very sympathetic to that.
One thing that I've taken away from this is constantly the theme of sympathy and empathy and understanding, which needs to go both ways, of course. And I think that's not only very appreciated, it's very insightful. Constantly, and I said this earlier, constantly people who I speak to who have experience in things that I don't, I ask them questions. There's constantly this thread of, look, you catch bees with honey. There is something to be said for that. And I think that's been a thread throughout this entire podcast. So I have taken over 30 minutes of your time, sir. I sincerely appreciate that. I think we can get, unless there's anything else you have to add to this, we can get this podcast wrapped up.
Well, let me just tell people, I'm a Ventura County lawyer. I'm not an LA lawyer. I think your audience is more geared towards Los Angeles County. Anyone who wants to call me is welcome to call me. I'm one of the only lawyers in the world who answers his own phone. And I'm going to do this. I'll give you my phone number and my website. So anyone that wants to read my biography and wants to call me, I'm at briannomi.com, my name, briannomi.com. And my phone number is 805-444-5960. I never charge for phone calls. If people want to reach out to me, I'll give them a few minutes of my time for free. So that's what I offer to people anytime. And I'm happy to share my knowledge and try to guide people in the right way. A lot of people just are afraid. They don't have the right information. Get the right information. I'm one resource among many that I think hopefully can be of help to people.
Yeah, wonderful. And information, in my opinion, is a great stress reliever. That's when I'm worried, I do research, and it gives me an idea as to what the lay of the land is. And I think just in this podcast, you've done a great job of that. I have family members who own property. I'm going to send them the link to this podcast. They need to hear you talk. A lot of people need to hear you talk. So I'll make sure that this gets out there and people have the information. And hopefully that information helps lubricate the process so it's not so horrible on everyone. And anyone listening at home, thank you so much. I know we went half an hour today. Sincerely, I appreciate you for being here. Mr. Nomi, I appreciate you for being here as well. And everyone at home, obviously he's given you all his information. Please feel free to reach out to him. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the second episode of Schmoozin with Forouzan. Thanks, guys.